What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? This is Jose Ortiz from PetRockMedia.com, and today we're going to talk about firmware upgrades for the Fuji X-T2. So Fuji's at it again. Fuji has updated the firmware to their flagship cameras, their X-Pro2 and their X-T2. I'm filming right now on the Fuji X-T2 with the stock or with the included 18 to 55 millimeter 2.8 to 4.0 Fuji lens. And it's been upgraded with the latest firmware, firmware 2.0 if I'm not mistaken. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of go over a few of those key points that came with the new firmware update. If you haven't already heard, Fuji announced mid-March that they were going to be releasing a new firmware for both of the cameras. With a lot of user feedback and consumer feedback, customer feedback, they were able to add a lot of features that a lot of customers were asking for with the Fuji cameras. Specifically, in my mind, the X-T2. The X-Pro2, to me, was awesome for what I utilize it for, which is a lot of street shooting. And the X-T2 I utilize a lot for landscape, wedding, portraiture, things like that. The X-Pro2, don't get me wrong, can definitely do that, but I mainly use that for street. So the way Fuji's doing this is that they're releasing a total, if I'm not mistaken, 34 updates to the actual Fuji lineup. And the way they're doing it is they're kind of staggering out the update. The first update was just released March 30th, and then the next one should be released here in the coming days. Just some key little points as far as what the new update has. Extended ISO from 125 and 160 is now selectable. The update adds ISO 125 and ISO 160 to extended ISO values. So for those of you who don't know, Fuji usually stock natively is ISO 200. Now you're able to select those lower f-stop ISOs. Programmable long exposure is now up to 15 minutes in T mode or bulb mode for those of you who utilize or are coming from the DSLR side. So now it's upgraded or now expandable up to 15 minutes for long exposure. So for those maybe astrophotographers out there who want to utilize their X-T2, now you have that option. Full range of ISO adjustments, this is a big one. A lot of my friends that have DSLRs, some of the things that they're missing are the dials. One thing that Fuji has going for it is that it does have an old school feel to it. The downside is that it does have such an old school feel to it that a lot of nowadays DSLR photographers have become accustomed to certain features that their DSLRs have. One of them being the use of the command dial or the rotary dial on the back. Now with Fuji, that back dial can be utilized to adjust your ISO. Some photographers were complaining that it was the dial. Of course, for my film photographers, that feels very useful, and that feels very common if you're used to shooting film. However, with the movement to DSLRs and digital photography, you used to be able to, or you can with DSLRs, just quickly change it. Now you're able to do that on the Fuji cameras as well. Improved in focus, autofocus continuous mode. Autofocus has been greatly improved from Fuji cameras, especially me being an early adopter of the original X100 camera. One of the things that killed it was their autofocus. That was one of the biggest complaints. I kept it because a lot of things that I did was street photography, and it wasn't necessarily people photography, but more of just capturing the story of a particular area. So a lot of buildings, a lot of detailed shots and things like that. So I didn't really need a super fast autofocus. Now, as I wanted to start shooting more and more people in the street, that became a little bit of a problem. And then through firmware updates like we're talking about now, the X100 definitely has come along since its beginning stages. Now, it's nowhere as fast as some of these newer cameras who obviously have faster processors and things like that. But it definitely did come a long way from its original release with the autofocus. With the new Fujis, specifically the X-T2, and if you add the booster grip and you're allowed the higher frame rates, 14 frames per second, with continuous autofocus, occasionally, if you weren't using the mechanical shutter Sometimes it would hunt a little. According to the new update, that is supposed to be changed, and you're able to fine tune a little bit more. So that should be able to help you. Addition of a smaller focus point size to a single autofocus point. So what that means is that when you were focusing and when you were selecting points, you used to, your little square would cover a couple of focus points. Well, now they've made it to where a single autofocus point can be where you autofocus. So if you just put it right on the eyeball, right on the iris, that's where it's going to focus. So at least, especially for portraiture photography, you'll put it right on the eye, take your photo, and you're guaranteed to at least have that eye tack sharp. Re-autofocusing in video recording, that's a big one for those of you utilizing this camera for videography. Now it has an updated autofocusing in video recording. With the update, if you have pressed the shutter release button, the autofocus will now readjust. So a lot of times what you were focused on is kind of what you were stuck with. Now you're able to do that. On top of that, with the new firmware update, you're also now allowed to change your ISO as you're filming. So you don't have to stop, readjust, and then continue shooting. Now you're able to adjust as you are filming. So if lighting happens to change, you now have the ability to change the ISO while you're filming. Addition of the Eye Sensor Plus LCD image display in view mode. A lot of times people were, especially in videography, if you started with the sensor on and then you let go, you can never get the video screen back. Now you're able to go back and forth. Voice memo function, that's a big one, especially if you do HDR photography, which there's a huge HDR update, and we'll get to that here in a few moments. But now with the voice memo update, so what you can do now is what I usually do when I'm taking HDR photos, my bracketed sequence, is I used to put like a thumb or my finger or something that allowed me to know, okay, this is where my bracket's going to stop, and then I put my fingers up again, a thumb or whatnot, my hand. And that let me know when I was in Lightroom that those photos in between there are my bracketed photos. Now with the addition of voice memo, I can hold down the button in the back, make a quick, up to 30 seconds if I'm not mistaken, yes, up to 30-second voice memo clip that in playback mode, you can actually hear that. So what I can do is I can put, this is an HDR bracketed shot from so-and-so. Let it go. And what it will do is put a WAV file right next to that file, or that photo file, that raw file. So that way when you do import those files, you'll see the audio and you'll be able to play and you're like, okay, this is the bracketed set of photos that are about to come in, so that way I can edit those, find them a little bit easier, help your workflow get sped up, especially if you're like me. Sometimes I'm just caught up in the moment, I forget to put my finger out, I take them, and then I'm here thinking, oh my god, where was it? Shoot, where did it start? Okay, I think this is it. I think this might be the super high overexposed, this may be the severely underexposed, and it just became kind of a hassle. With that being said, one of, to me, the biggest upgrades, and for those of you who use a lot of Nikon or Canon DSLRs, specifically Nikon, Canon, some of the higher end DSLRs have the ability, but some of the lower ones, like the kind of like the Rebels, even as far back as like the 5Ds, the last camera I shot with before I kind of went to mirrorless was the Canon 5D Mark II. That camera could only do 3 bracketed with up to, I believe, 3 stops, if not 2 stops, whereas some of the Nikons could do 7 bracketed frames with up to 1 to 2 to 3 stops, if I'm not mistaken. So with that being said, the Fujis now can shoot auto exposure bracketings from the current 3 frames, which is what it is now, to now up to 9 frames with plus or minus 3 EV. So what that means is that when you set your middle point and you set it to 9 frames, it'll go from the left, -12, all the way to +12. So that is a huge dynamic range that you'll now be capturing in that particular stacked photo. So if you want to do some focus stacking, if you wanted to do some HDR work and you really needed some detail, you can always stack that in Photoshop, bring out some of the detail. You have a huge range of dynamic range, essentially, with that one shot or that one bracketed sequence. So to me, in my opinion, that was one of the biggest upgrades to me from this new firmware update. But again, guys, all these updates, you can take them how you want. For me, the HDR auto exposure bracketing is the biggest update, along with the voice memo. Those two are going to work hand in hand for me. Some of you may find some of the other more videography centered updates to be a little bit more beneficial. So just kind of play around with your camera, update it. Don't forget to have a full battery on there. You have the X-T2, be sure you plug in that AC power adapter, get the upgrade going, download the file. It takes maybe 30 seconds to a minute to do the full process. And before you know it, you'll be shooting now with almost what it feels a brand new camera, which is what Fujifilm has come to be known by their consumers, and why it feels like a lot of times you're getting almost a brand new camera. And I just recently purchased this bad boy a few months ago, so it feels like I'm getting Christmas early. So once again, guys, this is Jose from PetRockMedia.com. Don't forget to hit that like button down below, subscribe, give me a thumbs up too if you got them. Any comments, leave them down below, good or bad, I accept it all. Once again, guys, this is Jose Ortiz from PetRock Media, signing out.